Hey, Fae folk, welcome back. So, I think that we have all known for quite some time that in general, Mattel's pricing is bonkers, nonsense, all over the place, sporadic, pick whatever word makes you happy. And specifically within the context of their collector Monster High dolls, it really genuinely has felt for a long time for myself and for I know a lot of you all as well. Like these dolls are just so expensive and it doesn't really feel like we're getting that much. And it's been something where you sort of use these excuses for yourself, like, maybe it's the licensing or maybe it's just inflation is that crazy. Personally, I've always been like, I still think that they're, charging way too much regardless of all of the excuses. Like, yes, I know inflation is a thing. I still think that they're charging an insane amount for most of their dolls. Like, basically, this is just something that I think has been in the collective consciousness of G1 collectors or anyone who pays attention to the G1 style collector releases. But a recent release, the Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack, to me has really just shown a light on just how bad Monster High's pricing is and just how actually ridiculous it is. And so I wanted to talk about it today. Before I go any further, I do want to apologize. I'm sure you're hearing some noises in the background right now. My cat's playing as I'm doing this voiceover, and I sure as shit am not going to stop her just for the sake of slightly better audio. So if that pisses you off, I'm sorry, but she does in fact take priority for me. But yes, we're going to be comparing in today's video the Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack with some other recent collector Monster High releases, just to really show you like what we got with that pack for what price, and how ridiculous all of Monster High's other releases look by comparison. Like, obviously, I'm very happy that the Spelldon and Valentine pack was like a better price for the value, but it also is just like they shot themselves in the foot so hard because now you're going to see it's so blatantly obvious how much they're overcharging us for other dolls. But before I can get into that, I know I keep like disclaiming and stuff. I just have to, okay? The internet is a terrible place, and if I don't, someone's going to be in my comments being like, you're wrong because this. Anyway, as we're comparing these dolls, this has absolutely nothing to do with my personal taste, my personal like opinions on any characters that we're talking about. Like, it's not about aesthetics, and it's also not about do I like the characters, and I would ask that you try to view it that way as well. We are going to be talking about some character dolls from the Skeletor line, and it might be that these characters mean a lot to you, and that is completely fine. You might even like the dolls, and that is also completely fine. Believe me, I have some dolls that are objectively very low quality that I really, really adore just because I like them, and that's okay. But for the purposes of today's video, the things that I'm bringing up are not about the character. It's not meant to be a critique on the franchise that these things might be from. It's not about anything like aesthetically. It is purely from a quality, like bang for your buck standpoint. So I'm not trying to offend anyone by talking negatively about these characters that, again, like I'm sure it's somebody's favorite out there. I'm just trying to look at the quality of things. So with all of that out of the way, now we can finally get into it. So obviously, in order to like compare any of the other dolls, we have to establish a baseline with Spelldon and Valentine. So I made this little handy dandy graphic sort of illustrating all of the factors that I was thinking about that I would think like contribute to the cost, and also things that the customer might look for and might want. So for the Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack, we obviously have two dolls, and they are Monster High original characters, which is notable because they do not therefore have a licensing fee as some of the other ones will have. We're trying to be fair with this analysis, okay? I'm admitting that they have the advantage in the fact that they don't have a licensing fee. With these, again, bearing in mind, it doesn't matter whatsoever if I like them. I do, if you just saw my review on these. But it doesn't matter if I like the fashion or if you like the fashion. We are purely talking quality. So these two both have layered fashion, multiple different pieces, and they are in very varied fabrics. Both of them have painted detail on their accessories, like the goggles have some painted detail on there. Spelldon's belt has painted detail. They both have detail on their shoes. They have a lot of painted detail on their accessories. Now with the hair fiber, I found it hard to tell just because I'm not the best at hair fiber anyway. That's something that I'm like newer to being educated on, I guess. I'm generally pretty good at identifying like straight polypropylene, but I have a little bit of a harder time depending on the quality of the poly hair when it's in curls, like Spelden's would be. And also, it's like so short that it's sort of hard to get a good grasp on it. And as of right now, I actually can't figure out what's going on with Valentine because I'm still trying to wash his hair out. It is so full of gel. So I will say that Spelden's felt to me softer than polypropylene. It felt like perhaps it would be saran, and I would think that Valentine's was also saran, but I did ask over on Instagram for like opinions, and almost everyone said that they both have saran. So that is why I am saying that they have saran. If I happen to be wrong on that, I do apologize. And you can sort of go through this video thinking, okay, well, no, that's actually not a benefit. I don't really think that it changes anything too much, but I did just want to be transparent. I think they're saran. I'm like 90% sure that they have saran, but I know I could be wrong. Anyway, we have new face sculpts, which I'm bringing up just because any new sculpting is obviously going to require like an additional production cost, as opposed to if you're just reusing the same head, you don't have to develop that sculpt, so it doesn't cost as much. They do also have custom stands in the sense that these stands are custom colors. The reason that that's notable when specifically we're talking about quality and like production costs and all of that jazz is because if every Monster High doll comes with a black stand, like a standard black stand, I'm going to use very small numbers here just to make it easier to illustrate. But obviously, I know that these are not the real numbers that we're talking about. But just say that Mattel releases 5 dolls, they're all collector dolls, and they all have the standard black Monster High stand, and each one has an edition size of 100. So across these 5 releases, there's 500 dolls. They can order from their factory 500 black stands to be made all at once because they know that they're going to use them not in just one of these releases, but all of these releases. And anytime that you can order in a bigger bulk, it is going to be cheaper for the company, like producing that. Like it's a less cost on Mattel's end if they're ordering black stands that can just be thrown into any collector release, especially because if they happen to have some that are left over, they'll know that in the future, yeah, we'll just stick it in our next collector release, right? Whereas if each of those 5 releases in this hypothetical scenario has to have a different color stand, that means that they have to make 5 separate orders of 100 each. So the size is smaller, so it already costs more, and they also have to make all of these separate orders because they can't reuse the stands. So what I'm getting at is that if these 2 characters had come with just these standard black stands, it could have been part of an unbelievably massive bulk order on Mattel's part, and they're just going to throw those stands on everything, and so therefore their like overhead is smaller. But because these 2 both have unique stands, Valentine has red and Spelden has purple, they can't reuse those stands for anything else, and they also had to order them special because it's not like they could just reuse a color that they already had in stock. Why did I talk for that long about stand color? I literally don't know, but I'm just saying I guess I just wanted to explain why that was notable to me. Anyway, they also both came with diaries, which is super exciting. Almost no Monster High doll comes with a diary anymore. And they have multiple accessories, even like not doing the sort of cheesy thing of counting what's on their bodies, such as like the necklace or the belt or anything like that. They come with live beakers, potion, a little potion book, a rose, and 2 pairs of goggles. So they come with a bunch of accessories. All of that you get for $55 total, which obviously if you have that, because it is a 2-pack, means you're spending $27.50 per doll. And at this point, that's essentially Playline prices here. Like there are G3 dolls that are $27 on the shelves right now. So bear this in mind as we go through and compare everything else. In the interest of being as fair as possible, the first 2 dolls that I selected to compare to our 2-pack are the 2 dolls that are like the most recent releases besides Spelldon and Valentine. So we are going to be starting off by taking a look at the Shorty release. So this is 1 doll as opposed to 2, but it is a licensed character, so I do acknowledge that that means that Mattel would have had to pay like a licensing fee to be allowed to produce this. We're going to talk about that in a second. This doll does come with multiple accessories. In this image, you're seeing them with the like punching glove hands, but they have a separate set of hands as well. They also come with like a little drink and everything, so we have some accessories going on, plus that tuft of hair on top is removable. So like kind of counts as an accessory. However, immediate bad side is that this doll does have polypropylene hair, and unlike with Spelldon and Valentine, where I was like, oh, this is a 90% certainty, this is confirmed. Like, this does have polypropylene hair, which is the worst hair fiber, so obviously that is a bad thing, hence why it's in red. Isn't that so cute? I did my color coding. Anyway, this doll does have a unique face sculpt as well as a unique hand sculpt. The hands that I mentioned earlier are not just like the standard Monster High hands, they are completely unique to this doll. So that is both cool and also would have upped the cost, so therefore justifies a higher price tag for her. She does have painted details. I know that they are sort of more minimal than a lot of people would prefer, and you could make the argument that they are even more minimal than Spelldon and Valentine. However, the fact is that we have had collectors in the past that don't have painted details, and this doll has painted details on almost all of the plastic accessories, like the earring and the cup that I mentioned, like the drink, and like the plastic clown collar. I do know a lot of people wanted the clown collar to be fabric. I get it, but that's not what we're talking about. We're just addressing the fact that at least all of the plastic has painted detail to it. However, this doll does come with a standard stand, and also the fabric is also not necessarily what is favored amongst collectors. Much like how poly will degrade over time, this pleather material that like a majority of the outfit is made of is also prone to peeling, and so that is a like downside for the doll, because that's not like as high a quality fabric as they could be using. And this doll did cost $70. So mind you, that Spelldon and Valentine, if you're looking at a per doll cost, were $27.50 per doll. So this is damn near $50 more expensive than a single one of those dolls would be. Technically closer to like 40, but point is, that is a significant price increase. And it can't just be the licensing fee. There's absolutely no way that the licensing fee alone is the reason this doll is so much more expensive than, we'll just say Spelldon. We're just going to take Spelldon out of the pack because I'm like trying to do if you were to buy just one of them, right? That there's no way that a licensing fee is so expensive that it has to be passed on to the consumer at a rate of $40 to $50 per doll. And the reason that I can say that so confidently, I would like to direct your attention to the Bratz and Hello Kitty collab. Now, there were a lot of problems with this collab. We're not talking about those because that's not like the point right now. And I do recognize that this is both a different like collaboration brand, Hello Kitty versus Killer Clowns from Outer Space, sort of different things, and also a different production brand, MGA versus Mattel. But I think that the difference is so vast that the point still stands. These three Hello Kitty dolls definitely required a licensing fee, right? MGA had to pay a licensing fee to Sanrio to be allowed to make these dolls. Otherwise, it would have been like some form of copyright infringement or something. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. These dolls retailed for $35 US. That's like 10-ish dollars more expensive than a typical Bratz doll. Maybe 15, depending on like which release that you want to look at. So whatever licensing fee MGA had to pay to Sanrio, they can get away with making these Bratz dolls only $10 to $15 more expensive per doll. Whereas with Shorty, it's $40 to $50 more expensive than the baseline that we have established with Spelldon and Valentine per doll. I do recognize also that MGA has a lot of other Hello Kitty products that they are working on coming out with, and that I think they already have come out with for some of them. So presumably the licensing fee is spread across a wider like range for them, but it still just seems a little ridiculous that as the consumer we would be paying a $40 to $50 licensing fee. I don't know. To me, it just doesn't compute. And especially because we are going to be taking a look at some dolls in this video where the licensing fee is a little bit more spread out than Shorty. You know, this is the only Killer Clowns from Outer Space doll that they're making, so they have to put all of the licensing fee cost into the price of just Shorty. But there are going to be some others on this list that that's not the case for, and yet they're still ridiculously high. So all of that to say, I don't think that the licensing fee is going to hold up by the end of this. Plus, we need to note that as we're talking about this, we're talking about a doll that is $40 to $50 more expensive per doll than Spelldon and Valentine, that is objectively worse quality in the sense that it objectively would have taken less money, like purely to produce the doll because they're using shitty materials for the hair and some of the fabric and they're using a standard stamp. Anyway, let's move on to the next comparison. I feel like I sounded like really heated there for a second, and it's just like it's not against Shorty. It's not against any of these dolls, just to be clear. I actually liked Shorty. The only reason I didn't get that doll is because I was saving my money for other dolls. All of like the vitriol that you might be sensing as I'm going through this is directed at Mattel as a company. I just want to make that double, triple, whatever clear. So the next doll that we're going to be comparing is one that, as of time of recording, just had the Fang Club like early access release. So this doll hasn't even like fully released yet, but we have pictures, and Spelldon and Valentine just came out, and then this is like the one right after that. So again, sort of like Shorty being the one right before that, or like one of the ones right before that, I feel like this is a good comparison because it was released around the same time. So once again, one doll and a licensed character, sort of similar to Shorty. We also do have a new, I believe, hand sculpt. The fingers are like extra long, like they have like nails on there. I think this is a new sculpt, but if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments, obviously. That would only make the comparison worse. So like if I'm wrong, it's fine. It's not like, I guess, disproving my point. I don't know. But I do think that it's a new hand sculpt, and so I do want to give credit where credit is due. There are some accessories with this doll. Forgive me, I don't know like if this is lightning. I'm just gonna say lightning. The lightning shooting out of the hands is like something that's attached to the wrist that you can pull off. So that is like a fun removable accessory. And obviously you can see two dogs. So like the character does come with some accessories. I didn't mean to put that in red. I'm just now seeing that that is in red in my little like graphic here. Sorry, some accessories is supposed to be in green. Please forgive me for that one. Standard stand though. So once again, not any new colors or anything like that. The outfit appears to me to be all one piece. Like it looks like a jumpsuit at most. This is a top and bottom though. So it looks to me like it's all one embellished fabric with no layers, all just one piece. I don't know the hair fiber. Like I said, this doll hasn't like released yet. Like they just had the selling period start for, again, Fang Club, so I can hardly decide on that. So, you know, for that one, if you want to kind of give them more grace and just assume that this is in fact Saran, we can go with that, but it's technically unknown. I'm not counting that as a fault though, because obviously it would be really unfair for me to count that as a fault when I don't know for sure. And once again, this doll does retail for $70. So I would personally argue, again, completely regardless of which doll you like better. Like if you love Gozer, that is so super. I hope you were able to get them if you wanted them. But like just looking between Gozer and Shorty, I would honestly argue that Shorty is more detailed simply because there's more accessories, there's more painted detail to the accessories, there's different fabrics on the outfit, all of that jazz. I'm not saying Shorty's better because of that. I'm just saying that even Shorty, I think, technically speaking, has more detail at least. However, this one might have better hair fiber and doesn't have the like bad clothing quality. So I feel like Shorty and Gozer could potentially be sort of comparable. But if we compare to Valentine and Spelldon, once again, this is a $70 single doll compared to two dolls for $55, significantly fewer accessories, much less detailed outfits. So again, we're just seeing this is not holding up quality-wise to the Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack. It just isn't. So the only thing possible that could be upping the price on this is the licensing fee. And I just went on that whole rant about why I think that that's sort of a silly thing. Like I just cannot accept the concept of a licensing fee adding an extra $40, essentially doubling the cost of a doll, more than doubling the cost of a doll. I just can't wrap my head around that. But in case I am dead ass wrong about the licensing fee, in case that it truly just is that expensive and there's no way around it, my next example will show you why that actually isn't Mattel's problem specifically. Even, again, if I am super wrong, I could be, it still doesn't matter. It still isn't a valid reason for them to be charging that much, as the next doll will show. And that next doll is, of course, the He-Man Skeletor Skeletor that came out earlier this year, so a little bit older than the last two comparisons we've looked at, but still definitely quite recent. I'm going to talk about the license at the end here. I'm just going to go really quickly through what they have and don't have. So it is a single doll. They do have a new face sculpt, so that would have added to the cost a little bit. However, there is minimal painted detail. Like most of this is unpainted plastic. It is actually just mostly plastic in general. Even like the skirt is more of a plastic than a fabric. There's really minimal accessories. That staff that she's holding is pretty much it. Comes with a standard stand, but at the very least, this doll does have saran hair. I do want to say, just again, to keep in mind, like the focus of the point of this video, I have heard a lot of people like defend this doll by saying that the accessories being unpainted and like a lot of the design choices, like the plastic and everything, is to be more referential to some of the older action figures. And that very well could be the reason. I am not trying to take that away from you. Like that absolutely could be a justification for like the choices that were made in terms of the design. However, if that's the case, then it needed to be cheaper. That's all I will say on that. But the main thing that I wanted to talk about with this doll is that this is an internal license. Yes, it is a crossover in the sense that this is Monster High and like Masters of the Universe, He-Man, all of that jazz. I don't know what like the technical like proper term is, but you know what I'm talking about. It is a crossover, but Mattel owns Masters of the Universe. They own He-Man, they own Skeletor. They do not have to pay any licensing fees whatsoever to produce anything that like is involved with that. So there are no licensing fees. Even though this is not purely Monster High branded, even though it's not like an original Monster High character like Spelldon and Valentine, they do not have to pay licensing fees to use their own character just because it's in a different franchise. This doll is still $70 for one doll. Even taking away the quality issues, even completely ignoring that, this means that a doll like Gozer that does have a licensing fee is $70, and so is this one. So that's why I don't think I'm wrong saying that they are really like saying that it's the licensing fee that makes these things expensive. This is why I think that that can't be accurate, because it's just like, if that's true, why is this doll with no licensing fee the exact same price as a doll with a licensing fee? But again, I am still willing to admit I could be wrong. Maybe I don't understand the legality of these contracts, or maybe I'm just uneducated on licensing fees and all that jazz. But the important thing to note is, going back to comparing this to Spelldon and Valentine, this doll is $70 for one doll with no licensing fee attached. If you want to just buy Spelldon, like if you could just buy Spelldon, he would be $27.50. So this doll is, again, $40 more. But there's not an excuse that you can latch onto this time. Plus, the doll is less detailed than Spelldon. Again, it's fine if you like this doll more than Spelldon. Like, everyone is allowed to have their own preferences. That is okay, but purely from a quality standpoint and purely from a standpoint of looking at like what it might cost to produce these things, this doll has less of that than Spelldon does, and is still, without the licensing fee, $40 more expensive. $20 more expensive than the entire 2-pack. You can get both Spelldon and Valentine for cheaper than you could get this doll. And I think that's actually crazy, but I'm still not done comparing because we're in rant mode now and I just really need to prove my point. So these last two dolls I picked because I think that these are probably the most fair, or like the most one-to-one comparisons. The other dolls in the video obviously were picked for a reason. Gozer and Shorty both released like very, very close in time frame to Spelldon and Valentine, so that felt very appropriate. And then obviously Skeletor, I wanted to bring up the licensing fee question and cast doubt upon that with this next one, the Collector River Styx doll. She's also quite a recent release, but importantly, she's the only other comparison I will be making in the video where this is also a Monster High original character. Technically speaking, I think that you could put Skeletor on the same level because, again, Skeletor doesn't have a licensing fee, but this is definitely a step up, a step closer to being a one-to-one comparison, even though it is just one doll, because River is a Monster High original character. So I felt like I definitely had to include her. So she does come with some accessories. She has her little handheld hourglass as well as the scythe. She does have saran hair. She also does have layers and multiple fabrics, like multiple different types of fabrics, and she has like a bodysuit hidden under everything that you can see in this photo. She does have some new sculpting for her body. However, none of her plastic accessories have any painted detail. Any of like the different colors that you're seeing, it's like it was cast in that. There's not any actual painted on detail on like her shoes or like her headpiece or anything like that. And she does have a standard stand. And most importantly, this doll is $90. Again, I'm trying genuinely to be fair. Like, I'm not hyping up the Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack because I love it. I obviously do. Like, I am biased in a sense, I suppose, but I really am trying to be as objective as possible. And so I will freely admit that fabric wise, I'm sure that this cost more. Like, yes, Spelldon and Valentine do have lots of unique fabrics, but some of them are a lot less detailed. Like, Spelldon's jacket is sort of just a windbreaker fabric, and his tank top is a pretty standard fabric. And I imagine that, like, the full, like, two-tone reflective lace-covered cape probably like was more than a windbreaker jacket to produce, right? Like I can recognize that I do think some of the fabrics here would have been more expensive, and so perhaps River has a leg up in being worth her cost in that sense. I don't know the details of how much it costs to sculpt different pieces, so perhaps the face sculpts and the sculpting for River are pretty comparable. So like there are ways in which I do think that these dolls are fairly comparable in quality. Obviously, Spelldon and Valentine have like the painted detail and the fancy stands, but like I can see where they could be sort of level, but this is still $90. $90. Bearing in mind the entire 2-pack for Spelldon and Valentine is 55. One of those dolls is 27.50. So at that point, this is $60 more expensive. And this is another original character. Again, I'm trying to be fair. I'm trying to like give credit where credit is due. I recognize that there's like more going on, and this is like a fancier design. Still a little bit much. I just don't think that the perhaps more expensive fabrics for River could have possibly made it so that she would be $30 more expensive than a detailed 2-pack. I just think that's absolutely bonkers. So you can see that even when it comes to releases that are purely Mattel's original characters, the prices are not making sense. However, all of the comparisons so far have been single dolls as opposed to 2-packs, so it's only fair that I go ahead and compare one 2-pack to the 2-pack that we are discussing the most today. So this is the most recent Monster High Collector 2-pack, which is, of course, the third Beetlejuice set with Miss Argentina and the Magician's Assistant. Once again, I know I keep saying this, and I'm sure it's really irritating for some of y'all, but, like, trust me, I do actually have to say this many times. This is not about how I feel about Beetlejuice. It's not about how you feel about Beetlejuice. This is just quality. So these are 2 dolls as opposed to the single dolls that we've been paying attention to, as I said. So it is, in that sense, a much more one-to-one comparison of Spelldon and Valentine, despite the fact that these are licensed characters. One of them does have poly hair. I believe it's Miss Argentina. Please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. And then I think that the Magician's Assistant does have saran, but we still do have one of the 2 characters in the 2-pack having low quality hair. And I'm saying low quality accessories singularly because the couch that the Magician's Assistant is on is completely hollow. Like, completely just nothing there. You can't look at it from the back because there's not even like a backside sculpted on. It's just like this ugly, empty, hollow piece of plastic. And I'm sorry, I just think that that's low quality. I think that's insane that that got produced. However, we do have, I believe, some new body sculpting. Once again, as I've said several times, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But even though the magician's assistant does come in two halves, much like Corazon did initially, like she was the first Monster High doll to come in two halves or to be able to separate like that, I believe that I saw in someone's review on these the magician's assistant has a slightly different sculpting. Like it's not just completely reused from Corazon. So there is some new body sculpting in that sense. They do come sort of with a standard stand. We get a standard stand for Miss Argentina. The couch is functioning as the magician's assistant stand, but I'm not getting any credit, or I'm not giving them any credit for that, because again, I'm sort of counting that more as an accessory, but either way, it's low quality. So I'm not giving them credit for that couch. I'm so sorry. I like some people are really upset about that, like myself, and I feel like some people are not mad enough about it. Anyway, though, the clothing, listen, there's no real layers. I know that Miss Argentina has a cloak situation going on, but that's literally it. So there's no real layers. And I would say this is pretty much the bare minimum fabric variety. Like, there's not a lot going on there. I guess if you disagree that, like, obviously, sorry, if you disagree, that is okay. I'm not trying to say, I guess it's okay if you disagree. I just don't think that it changes my conclusion. So these dolls are $100, $50 per doll. Once again, I'm just throwing the licensing fee out because we saw with Skeletor that it doesn't matter. A Skeletor is going to be $70 whether they have to pay a licensing fee or not. And in addition, I feel even more comfortable throwing it out or counting it less when it comes to these dolls, because these are the third set of Beetlejuice dolls that we have gotten from Monster High Skeletor. So whereas with Shorty, they might have paid the licensing fee for Killer Clowns from Outer Space and they had to make up that entire cost with one doll, the Beetlejuice licensing fee, they have now made, each of the Beetlejuice dolls has been in a 2-pack. So now they've made 6 Beetlejuice dolls to spread out that licensing cost and to sort of make it easier to make up that licensing cost. So I think that there's even less of an excuse for them to be that bad. So looking at this, I just feel like these are such poor quality for the price anyway. Like I was already not a big fan of these in that sense because I think it's crazy that it's $100 and you got a hollow couch. But when you compare it to Spelldon and Valentine, this Beetlejuice pack is functionally double the cost. And purely from a quality standpoint, they're worse in pretty much every way. Like, Spelldon and Valentine also had new sculpts because they had new head sculpts. So that benefit they don't get. That's it. Like, that's the only good thing that I had to say about these dolls when it comes to the quality, is just that they had some new body sculpting. And I guess if you want to say they have a unique stand, I just don't see where these could possibly compare to Spelldon and Valentine. And they're functionally double the cost of those dolls. So really quickly before we conclude the video, I did just want to address why I didn't choose the Creep Productions as a reference point for this video, because all of the dolls that you're seeing here, the most recent round of Creep Productions, did retail for $27, which means that they're pretty much the same price as Spelldon and Valentine, given that those dolls were $27.50 a piece. So you might think that these are actually the absolute closest comparison and that I'm being really, really unfair, which I understand why you would think that. However, I think that because these are reproductions as opposed to a brand new design, they do sort of hold a different space. All of the dolls that we did compare today, whether they were owned by Mattel or Monster High specifically, or whether they were licensed out, every single one of them does have a new design. Even Valentine. Valentine does have an entirely new face sculpt compared to his initial San Diego Comic-Con doll, the only other doll of his that exists. His outfit is an entirely new design. So functionally, they built that doll from the ground up. They didn't even use the old face sculpt, so I think it's fair to call him a new design as well. Whereas obviously the Creep Productions are meant to be quite literally one-to-one productions of dolls from the past. So they're using older designs, and obviously I understand that they still have to produce things, and like some of them they might have lost the sculpts for, so they might have to resculpt things. Like I'm not trying to say that there isn't a production cost in these, but it's more of like the social contract between Monster High and its consumers that I think is important to acknowledge with the creep reductions, and I think is why they are at a much more reasonable price point, because these are meant to be, again, literally one to one from designs from a decade ago. Mattel can't really get away with getting rid of any of the design elements or cheapening out too much on any of the design elements, because then they wouldn't be a reproduction anymore. Then you couldn't call it that because it wouldn't be that. And even with that being the case, they still are cheaping out in certain ways, such as giving some of these dolls polypropylene hair. So, like, they can't say, oh, we're just going to remove Venus's leggings, because at that point, you're sort of moving out of reproduction territory. But they are doing what they can to cut costs anyway. Like I said, with like the hair and everything. I haven't gotten any of these three pre-productions, so I can't speak personally to the quality and everything, but I'm not sure if the quality is 100% comparable there. Even if the clothing quality is, though, like they are still cutting corners where they can. And I think the important part is just to acknowledge that because these are reproductions, I feel like Mattel has a lot less leeway with getting away with making them lower quality or simplifying the designs or making them cost more, because not only do they have this sort of unspoken social contract to, if you're saying that you're making a reproduction, make it a proper reproduction, but also people know how much these dolls initially cost, right? Like people understand that these were initially Playline dolls. They're retailing for more than they did originally. As I said, these creep reductions were like $27, whereas I think the originals were closer to 20. So they are still a little bit of a price increase, but it's still within the realm of something Playline. And when you are making a reproduction of a Playline doll, I do think that there's just a large portion of your audience, there absolutely is a large portion of the audience who would buy them at a significantly increased cost. Like, I know for sure that people would still have bought the Rebecca reproduction, even if she were $50, $60, $70. But I think with a reproduction specifically, you would be alienating much more of your consumer base by doing that. And there would be a much larger portion of your consumer base that would be unwilling to pay that much for a doll that is a reproduction of a doll that initially cost like 20 bucks. And on top of that, there is the fact that you can get the originals on the secondhand market. Yes, there are problems with that and reasons why people might prefer to get a creep reduction, because the secondhand market fluctuates a lot. And a lot of the time with G1 Monster High, it is really, really rough. So these dolls can be super expensive on the secondhand market. And also, they have like the glue head problem and all of these things. I know Rebecca's knees were a huge point of contention with her actual initial release, not with the creep reduction, because her initial release, the knees could like bend forward and people don't always like that. So there definitely are reasons why someone wouldn't want to buy a doll on the secondhand market. However, there is sort of a ceiling of a price tag that Mattel can actually put on any reproduction doll, simply because these are dolls that already exist in the world. And so they can't really get away with making them cost too much money, or else people are just going to buy them secondhand instead of buying the creep reductions. Whereas with a new design, all of the other dolls we discussed in today's video, there's not really an alternative unless you are going to someone who does custom dolls, unless you're buying a literal one of a kind doll. You can't get Monster High Shorty, you can't get the Monster High Beetlejuice dolls, and you can't get this version of Valentine with this face sculpt, and you can't get Spelldon at all. So there's not really as much of a limit as to how high they can put the price on those, because you don't have another option. Whereas with the creep reductions, you do always have the option of going secondhand and just trying to be patient and waiting until you get a good price. So for all of those reasons, I just think that the creep reductions sort of occupy their own space, and I didn't think that they made a super fair comparison when we're talking about the G1 collector pricing that Monster High puts out, because again, they're under different circumstances. So with all of that being said, I am fully aware, as I said at the beginning of this video, that I haven't said anything new Really? Like, we have been collectively as a community complaining about the Monster High prices for ages. I am so far from the first person to point out the difference in quality versus price, and also how some are way better than others, and yet they're the same price. And so that doesn't make sense. Like, this is all old news, and I am fully aware of that. However, I do feel like the reason that I ended up making this video was because of this Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack, because I genuinely think, like, it is completely fine if you loved every single other doll that I talked about today and you hate the Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack. If it's just like not your thing and you think these dolls are ugly, that is completely fine. Unless you're being homophobic about it, in which case, get the fuck off my channel. But like, if you just don't like them for literally any other reason than being homophobic, that is fine. Purely from a quality standpoint, these dolls were $55 for a 2-pack. That's not like uncomparable to playline quality. Like I said, there are G3 dolls that are like $25, $30 even. So this is realistically, in today's day and age, for $2, this is playline. Even though it's like marketed towards collectors and everything like that, the price tag that you're paying is so much more reasonable than any other collector doll. And then on top of that, the quality and the detail that you're getting feels so much better than the ones that I talked about today. And so I think this just really, really highlighted and illustrated how bad the price discrepancies were and how much we were being overcharged. And when you sit down and like literally compare it point by point, like I attempted to do in this video, I think it becomes abundantly clear that it's not just that Monster High is charging a lot, and it's not just that we're not really getting what we should be getting for these prices. They are proving that they are perfectly capable of giving us good dolls, really good dolls, at a reasonable price point, and they simply don't do it all the time. As I said at some point, in my opinion, they really shot themselves in the foot, especially with their releases being so back to back to back to back. I do think that if we were in a situation where there were like a grand total of 4 Monster High collector dolls coming out per year, it wouldn't be as stark and as obvious, because it's like, if you're waiting 3 months between releases, the lines are going to blur and you're going to forget, and like you're going to get excited about a new release and they're not going to be so overwhelming, so you might be willing to pay a little bit more. But when we just pretty recently got River, and then we just got Shorty, and then we got Spelldon and Valentine, and then we literally just got Gozer, like within the frame of 2 months max is 3 of those. Gozer, Shorty, and the Spelldon and Valentine 2-pack. I'm a little hazy on the time frame, sorry, but like at the most that was all within 2 months. And so it's impossible not to make these comparisons. And so it's sort of funny, because by virtue of this pack being so detailed and so nice and so like actually worth it, I do feel like Mattel has just really revealed how shitty everything else that they do is in comparison, at the very least price-wise. Again, I'm not saying design-wise even, I'm not saying like that you aren't allowed to like the other dolls, but we should not be paying those price tags if this is what they can give us for $55 for 2 dolls. And I'm just curious to see what they do in the future, because I just really think that this could be something that sort of turns the tide for people. And like, I think that much like it was a big realization for me, a sort of crystallization of the knowledge that I already had that Monster High dolls are too expensive, I kind of wonder if this is going to make people less willing to pay collector prices in the future, and if that's going to affect anything. I don't really know, but I just had to talk about it because it really truly felt like I had this nebulous concept in my mind that the Skeletor dolls are so ridiculously expensive, and making this video and looking at Spelldon and Valentine in comparison, to me, really just showed how bad the problem is, and I obviously had to talk about it. So I've done that for like nearly 45 minutes now, so that means it is now your turn. Let me know what you thought of like all my findings today. That's such a silly way to say that, all my findings, like I'm some scholar or something. But really, like, let me know if you think I was being fair with my comparisons, if you think I was wrong at any point, or if you think I'm perfectly correct and all of that jazz. I'm just really curious to see how you all are feeling, because I'm like, wow, this collector pricing is even worse than I thought it was. You know, like I think it's just so crazy to look at. And I would just like to be able to talk about that in the comments with you all. But that is going to be it for me for today, y'all. I do hope that this was on some level fun or entertaining for you. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.